In the 1950s, the United States military decided that the future of warfare was circular. They did not want more planes. They wanted flying saucers. This wasn't some late-night science fiction idea. It was a serious, top-secret government project. Imagine the scene. Top brass in a smoke-filled room, looking at sketches of fighter jets, and someone pipes up, "Gentlemen, what if we made it round?" And somehow, everyone agreed. This is the story of the time the Pentagon tried to build a UFO, and it went about as well as you'd expect. This is the story of the Avrocar. Our tale begins not in Roswell, but in Canada, with a brilliant but perhaps overly ambitious British aircraft designer named John Jack Frost. Frost worked for Avro Canada, and he was obsessed with vertical takeoff and landing, or VTOL, aircraft. He believed that conventional runways were a vulnerability in a potential nuclear war. His solution? A craft that could take off from anywhere, zip through the sky at supersonic speeds, and land on a dime. His design looked less like a plane and more like something you'd see hovering over a field in a B-movie. It was a saucer. The idea behind Frost's creation was deceptively simple. He wanted to harness something called the Coanda effect, which is the tendency of a fluid jet to be attracted to a nearby surface. In his design, a massive central turbo-rotor, basically a giant, souped-up fan, would suck air in from the top and blast it down through the rim of the saucer. This downward thrust would, in theory, create a cushion of air beneath the craft, lifting it off the ground. Once airborne, the pilot could direct the flow of air to control ailerons and flaps around the edge, allowing the saucer to tilt and fly in any direction. The marketing pitch was incredible. This thing was supposed to be a flying jeep, a supersonic fighter, and a troop transport all rolled into one perfectly circular package. When Frost and his team at Avro presented this concept to the U.S. military, they were met with wide-eyed enthusiasm. The Air Force and the Army were both captivated by the potential. The Air Force saw a supersonic interceptor that could reach Mach 4, flying at altitudes over 100,000 feet. The Army envisioned a rugged all-terrain reconnaissance vehicle and troop carrier that could navigate any battlefield. The promises were so grand, so revolutionary, that the Pentagon practically threw money at the project. They classified the entire thing as top secret, giving it the code name Project 1794, and poured millions of dollars into making Jack Frost's flying saucer a reality. The dream was on. They were going to build a UFO. With the funding secured, the engineers at Avro Canada got to work. The Avrocar, as the test vehicle was officially named, was a sight to behold. It was 18 feet in diameter, a gleaming silver disc that looked like it had been pulled straight from a Hollywood set. In the center was a cockpit for 2 crew members, who would pilot the craft. Surrounding them was the heart of the machine, the massive turbo-rotor, powered by 3 Continental J69 turbojet engines. The engineering was complex, a delicate dance of ducts, vents, and control systems designed to tame the immense power of the jets and channel it into stable flight. As the components came together, the excitement was palpable. Technicians in lab coats swarmed around the saucer, tightening bolts and checking gauges. The promise of a revolutionary new form of flight was within their grasp. But as the assembly neared completion, some troubling signs began to emerge. The theoretical models were one thing, but the practical realities of building this machine were another. The control systems were proving to be fiendishly complicated. How do you steer a craft that has no wings, no tail, and relies entirely on shifting jets of air? The team was venturing into completely uncharted aerodynamic territory. When the first test pilot was selected, he approached the Avrocar with a mixture of excitement and trepidation. Climbing into the tight cockpit, surrounded by a dizzying array of unfamiliar levers and dials, must have felt like preparing for a mission to another planet. During one of the preliminary engine tests, a visiting general watched as the machine vibrated violently on its test stand. Turning to Jack Frost, he asked with a note of concern, "Mr. Frost, is it supposed to shake like that? It looks like it's having a panic attack." It was a moment of subtle comedy that hinted at the chaos to come. The engineers reassured everyone that these were just minor kinks to be worked out. The saucer was ready for its first taste of freedom. The stage was set for either a historic breakthrough or a spectacular failure. The day of the first tethered flight test arrived. The Avrocar was rolled out onto the airfield, its silver surface shimmering in the sun. The pilot climbed in, the canopy was sealed, and the 3 jet engines spooled up with a deafening roar. The plan was simple. get it to hover a few feet off the ground while secured by tethers, just to see if the basic concept worked. As the pilot increased the throttle, the ground began to tremble. The giant fans sucked in a vortex of air, and the Avrocar began to lift. It worked. For a glorious few seconds, the saucer was airborne. And then, the wobbling started. The engineers quickly discovered a critical flaw in the design. The cushion of air it was supposed to ride on was incredibly unstable. Instead of a stable, controllable lift, the saucer behaved like a dinner plate balanced precariously on top of a pole. The slightest imbalance would cause it to lurch and tilt violently. This phenomenon, which the engineers grimly dubbed hubcapping, made the craft almost impossible to control. It couldn't rise more than 3 feet off the ground without threatening to flip over or spin out of control. It was less of a futuristic aircraft and more of a terrifying, high-powered hovercraft with a mind of its own. Undeterred, or perhaps just too deep into the project to turn back, the team pressed on. They moved to untethered flight tests, hoping that with more forward speed, the craft might gain some aerodynamic stability, like a frisbee. They took the Avrocar out to a large, open field. The engines roared to life and the saucer lifted, kicking up an enormous cloud of dust, dirt, and grass. It was a dramatic sight, but the results were the same. The saucer would hover erratically, skittering across the ground at a maximum speed of about 35 miles per hour, but it stubbornly refused to climb any higher. Any attempt to push it higher resulted in the same violent, uncontrollable oscillations. The pilots reported that flying the Avrocar was a nightmare. The controls were sluggish and unresponsive. It felt less like piloting an aircraft and more like trying to wrestle a wild animal. Instead of a nimble flying jeep, the Army had a very expensive and very loud leaf blower. Instead of a supersonic interceptor, the Air Force had a ground-effect vehicle that could barely clear a pothole. The dream of a revolutionary flying machine was quite literally failing to get off the ground. The saucer was stuck in ground effect, a prisoner of the very air cushion that was supposed to set it free. After 2 years of frustrating and dangerous tests, the reality of the situation was undeniable. The Avrocar was a failure. The fundamental physics of the design were flawed. The hubcapping problem was inherent to the circular airframe and could not be engineered away. In 1961, the U.S. military, having already spent what would be over $100 million in today's money, officially pulled the plug. The project was cancelled, and the dream of a military-grade flying saucer died on a dusty airfield in Canada. The ambitious goal of a Mach 4 interceptor was a fantasy. The practical application of a flying jeep was a bust. It turns out that physics does not care how cool your aircraft looks. The laws of aerodynamics are unforgiving, and a perfect circle is, aerodynamically speaking, a very bad shape for a high-speed aircraft. The only thing the Avrocar successfully invaded was the military budget. Today, the 2 completed Avrocar prototypes sit quietly in museums. One is at the National Museum of the U.S. Air Force in Ohio, and the other is at the U.S. Army Transportation Museum in Virginia. They look like discarded movie props, gleaming silver oddities from a bygone era of Cold War ambition and technological optimism. They stand as a verified reminder that innovation is full of dead ends, and that sometimes the future is just a fancy, wobbly hovercraft. The Avrocar never conquered the skies, but it did secure its place in history as one of aviation's most fascinating and spectacular failures. It is proof that even the most powerful military on Earth can't always bend the laws of nature to its will, no matter how much it wants to believe in flying saucers. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this trip into the weird world of military history, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more stories. See you next time.